What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved action legends sits down with a late-night host who's forgotten the art of respect? You won't believe what unfolds when Sylvester Stallone faces off against Jimmy Kimmel in what started as a routine promotional interview but exploded into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how years of pent-up frustration can erupt in spectacular fashion, leaving audiences stunned and social media ablaze. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two titans of entertainment clash in the most unexpected way possible. The atmosphere in Studio 6A felt different from the moment Sylvester Stallone walked through those familiar doors. The 77-year-old legend, promoting his latest directorial effort, carried himself with the same commanding presence that made him a household name decades ago. His weathered hands, scarred from years of authentic fight choreography, gripped a coffee cup as he settled into the guest chair across from Jimmy Kimmel. The audience erupted in their typical enthusiastic applause, but seasoned observers noticed something in Stallone's eyes, a wariness that suggested this wouldn't be just another promotional stop on the late-night circuit. Kimmel, sporting his signature smirk and clearly prepared with his usual arsenal of prepared jokes, seemed oblivious to the subtle tension radiating from his guest. The host's opening monologue had already taken several pointed jabs at older Hollywood stars, trying to stay relevant. Comments that industry insiders would later recognize as foreshadowing for the disaster about to unfold. As the show's familiar theme music faded and the cameras focused on the interview setup, Kimmel launched into his introduction with characteristic smugness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Italian stallion himself, Sylvester Stallone." The audience cheered, but Stallone's acknowledgement seemed perfunctory, his famous smile not quite reaching his eyes. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, already positioning himself as the alpha in this particular dynamic. "Sly, great to have you back. You know, I was just thinking, how many times can one guy play the same character before people start wondering if you're actually acting or just being yourself?" The question landed with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and seasoned talk show viewers could immediately sense the shift in energy. Stallone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his response remained measured. "Well, Jimmy, I think when you create something that resonates with people for almost 50 years, it becomes more than just a character. It becomes part of the cultural fabric. Not everyone understands the responsibility that comes with that kind of legacy." Kimmel's laugh came a beat too late, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Right. The cultural fabric. Speaking of fabric, I heard you still do your own stunts. At your age, isn't that kind of, I don't know, dangerous? I mean, we don't want you breaking a hip on set." The audience laughed nervously, sensing the underlying disrespect in what was supposed to be light banter. Stallone's response came with deliberate precision. "I've been doing my own stunts since before you knew what a television camera was, Jimmy. Physical fitness and dedication to craft don't have expiration dates. But I suppose someone who's never pushed their body beyond walking from the desk to the guest chair wouldn't understand that concept." The temperature in the studio dropped several degrees. Kimmel's smile became more forced, his confidence wavering as he realized his guest wasn't going to simply laugh along with the jokes at his own expense. The host attempted to regain control by shifting tactics, but his next move would prove to be a critical miscalculation. "Hey, no need to get defensive, Sly. I'm just saying, there comes a time when maybe it's better to let the younger guys handle the heavy lifting. You know, pass the torch. Some of us know when to step aside gracefully." Kimmel's words carried an unmistakable condescension, delivered with the smug certainty of someone who believed his position as host gave him immunity from consequence. Stallone leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the gravelly intensity that had made him famous. "Stepping aside gracefully. That's interesting advice coming from someone whose idea of heavy lifting is reading jokes other people wrote for you off a teleprompter. Tell me, Jimmy, what exactly have you built with your own hands? What legacy are you leaving beyond cheap shots at people who've actually accomplished something?" The audience fell into an uncomfortable silence. This wasn't the playful celebrity banter they'd come to expect. This was real tension, raw and unfiltered, playing out in real time on national television. Kimmel's production team could be seen shuffling nervously in the wings, clearly unprepared for this level of genuine conflict. Kimmel attempted to laugh it off, but his discomfort was becoming increasingly obvious. Wow, okay. Someone's feeling a little sensitive tonight. Look, I'm just trying to have some fun here. This is supposed to be entertainment, not a philosophy class about legacy and accomplishment. His tone carried a dismissive edge that suggested he still hadn't grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation. Entertainment, Stallone repeated, the word dripping with disdain. Is that what you call it when you invite guests on your show just to mock them? When you use your platform to tear down people who've spent their lives building something meaningful? I've been in this business for 5 decades, Jimmy. I've seen hosts who understood that their job was to elevate their guests, not diminish them for cheap laughs. The comparison was clear, and everyone in the studio understood the implication. Kimmel's face flushed slightly, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under the weight of Stallone's unflinching critique. The host's next words would push this confrontation past the point of no return. Listen, Sly, I don't know what crawled up your ass tonight, but this is my show. I ask the questions, I make the jokes, and guests like you come on to promote whatever movie you're trying to squeeze a few more dollars out of. If you can't handle a little ribbing, maybe you should stick to podcasts where they'll kiss your ring and tell you how amazing you are. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in Studio 6A knew that something irreversible had just occurred. Stallone's eyes narrowed, his legendary composure finally beginning to show cracks. The man who had portrayed some of cinema's most resilient characters was about to show Jimmy Kimmel exactly what happens when respect is discarded and professionalism is abandoned in favor of ego and arrogance. But what happened next would transform this interview from an uncomfortable moment into television history. The silence that followed Kimmel's arrogant declaration stretched for what felt like an eternity. Stallone sat perfectly still, his hands clasped. In front of him, studying the host with the calculating gaze of someone who had faced down countless opponents both on screen and off. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had earned every syllable of respect through blood, sweat, and decades of unwavering dedication. Your show, Stallone repeated slowly, each word deliberate and measured. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. This is your show, your stage, your rules. But here's something you might not understand. Respect isn't something you can command from behind a desk. It's something you earn through how you treat people, especially when you hold all the power in the room. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado beginning to evaporate as he realized the gravity of what he had unleashed. The audience remained dead silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't scripted television drama. This was 2 men, each representing different eras of entertainment, engaging in a battle of principles that had been building for years. And let me tell you something else about respect, Stallone continued, his voice gaining intensity without losing its controlled edge. I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. Directors who could make or break careers with a single phone call. Studio executives who controlled $100 million budgets. You know what separated the good ones from the ones who didn't last? The good ones understood that everyone in that room, from the biggest star to the craft services guy, deserved to be treated with dignity. Kimmel attempted to interject, but Stallone's raised hand silenced him with surprising authority. I'm not finished. You want to talk about accomplishments? Let me tell you about accomplishment. I wrote Rocky in 3.5 days while I was broke, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, selling my dog because I couldn't afford to feed him. Every studio in town wanted to buy that script, but they all wanted to cast someone else. I said, no. I believed in something bigger than a quick payday. The host's face had gone pale, clearly unprepared for this level of raw honesty and controlled fury. His usual quips and deflections seemed pathetically inadequate against Stallone's unwavering intensity. The production staff in the wings looked like deer caught in headlights, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or let this historic moment play out. You know what happened next? Stallone's voice rose slightly, passion bleeding through his measured delivery. That movie made over $200 million worldwide. It won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It launched a franchise that's still going strong today. But more importantly, it gave hope to people who felt like underdogs. It showed them that with enough heart and determination, you could Overcome any obstacle. That's what accomplishment looks like, Jimmy. Not tearing people down for laughs, but building something that lifts people up. Kimmel finally found his voice, but his words came out smaller than before, lacking the commanding presence he'd started with. Look, Sly, I think you're taking this a little too seriously. It's just entertainment. People come here to laugh, to have fun. They don't want some heavy lecture about. About what? Stallone cut him off, his patience finally beginning to fray. About integrity? About treating people with respect? About understanding the responsibility that comes with having a platform? You're right, Jimmy. People do come here to laugh. But there's a difference between laughing with someone and laughing at them. There's a difference between entertainment and humiliation. The host tried to regain control of the situation, but it was like trying to hold back a dam with his bare hands. I mean, come on. You've done comedy. You've made fun of yourself plenty of times. What's the difference? Stallone's laugh was sharp and humorless. The difference is choice, Jimmy. When I make fun of myself, it's my choice. When I let other people make fun of me, it's because there's mutual respect and understanding. What you're doing isn't comedy. It's bullying with a live studio audience. You're using your position as host to punch down at people who come here as your guests, trusting that you'll treat them with basic professional courtesy. The weight of Stallone's words seemed to press down on the entire studio. Even the typically animated late-night audience sat in stunned silence, processing the raw truth of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad interview. This was a masterclass in dignity under fire, delivered by someone who had spent decades earning the right to speak with such authority that Kimmel's desperation was becoming increasingly apparent. His usual arsenal of jokes and deflections had proven useless against Stallone's uncompromising honesty. I don't know what you want me to say here, Sly. This is how late-night television works. This is what people expect. If you can't handle a little heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen. That final cliché proved to be the spark that ignited something deeper in Stallone. His composure, which had remained remarkably intact despite the escalating tension, finally showed signs of cracking. Handle the heat? His voice carried decades of accumulated frustration with exactly this kind of dismissive attitude. Jimmy, I've handled more heat than you can imagine. I've been written off, counted out, and dismissed more times than I can count. I've had critics tear apart my work, my appearance, my intelligence. You know what the difference is? They were honest about it. They didn't hide behind false hospitality and pretend to be my friend while sharpening their knives. The host's face flushed red, his carefully maintained image of control completely shattered. False hospitality? Are you kidding me? I invited you on my show. I'm giving you a platform to promote your movie. You should be grateful. Those last 3 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the studio, from the seasoned camera operators to the youngest production assistants, understood that Jimmy Kimmel had just made a catastrophic mistake. The idea that Sylvester Stallone, a man who had built an empire through sheer force of will and talent, should be grateful for the opportunity to be mocked and belittled on national television was so tone-deaf, so fundamentally disrespectful, that it crossed a line from which there could be no return. Stallone stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and final. The action itself was quiet, almost anticlimactic, but it carried the weight of finality. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, yet every person in that studio heard every word with crystal clarity. Grateful, he repeated, the word dripping with contempt. Grateful to be disrespected by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes doing what I do. Grateful to sit here and smile while you tear down everything I've worked for. Grateful to pretend that your insults are somehow helping my career. He shook his head slowly, a gesture that conveyed more disappointment than anger. You know what, Jimmy? I think our time here is done. But as Stallone moved toward what everyone assumed would be his exit, Kimmel made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. Wait, wait, wait. Kimmel called out, his voice cracking with panic. As he realized the magnitude of what was happening, the host shot up from his chair, abandoning any pretense of maintaining his composed television persona. You can't just walk out. This is live television. You have a contract. You can't just storm off because you can't take a joke. Stallone stopped mid-stride, his back still turned to the host. The silence that followed was deafening. broken only by the subtle hum of the studio lights and the barely audible whispers of crew members who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. When Stallone slowly turned around, his face carried an expression that had terrified fictional opponents across 5 decades of cinema. But this time, it was completely real. Can't take a joke? Stallone's voice was dangerously quiet, each word enunciated with surgical precision. Jimmy, let me explain something to you about jokes. A joke requires wit, timing, and most importantly, it requires that everyone involved gets to laugh. What you've been doing tonight isn't comedy. It's cruelty dressed up as entertainment. And the only person laughing is you. Kimmel's desperation became increasingly apparent as he realized his career was potentially crumbling in real time. Come on, Sly. Don't be like this. Sit back down. We'll finish the interview. Talk about your movie. Everything will be fine. The audience wants to hear about your project. The audience, Stallone repeated, turning to face the crowd that had sat in stunned silence throughout this unprecedented confrontation. You know what? You're right. Let's talk to the audience. He stepped closer to the crowd, addressing them directly while Kimmel watched helplessly from behind his desk. How many of you came here tonight expecting to see a host tear down his guest? How many of you thought you'd witness someone use their position of power to humiliate someone who came here in good faith? The audience remained silent, but their expressions spoke volumes. Uncomfortable glances were exchanged, and several people could be seen shaking their heads in disapproval. One older woman in the front row actually looked close to tears, clearly moved by the raw honesty of what she was witnessing. Stallone continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. I've been coming on talk shows for 50 years. I've sat across from legends like Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and Jay Leno. You know what they understood that seems to be lost today? They understood that when you invite someone onto your show, they become your guest. And you treat guests with respect, not as targets for your insecurities. Kimmel, sensing the room completely turning against him, made one last desperate play. Insecurities? Are you serious? I'm one of the most successful hosts in late-night television. I don't have insecurities about some washed-up action star who can't accept that his time is over. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Even Kimmel seemed to realize immediately that he had gone too far, his face paling as the full implications of his statement sank in. The production staff looked mortified, knowing that this moment would be replayed endlessly across social media and news outlets. This wasn't just a bad interview anymore. This was a career-defining disaster. Stallone's response came with the controlled fury of a master craftsman who had just watched his life's work being dismissed by someone who had never created anything of lasting value. Washed up? Time is over. He walked slowly back toward Kimmel's desk, his movement deliberate and intimidating. Jimmy, when you were still figuring out how to tie your shoes, I was already building a legacy that would outlast both of us. When you're forgotten, when your show is canceled and your jokes are collecting dust in some writer's room, Rocky Balboa will still be inspiring people to fight for their dreams. The host tried to interrupt, but Stallone's raised hand silenced him with absolute authority. You want to talk about time being over? Let me tell you whose time is over. It's over for hosts who think their job is to tear people down instead of building them up. It's over for entertainers who confuse cruelty with comedy. It's over for people who use their platform to satisfy their own petty jealousies instead of serving their audience. Kimmel's face had gone completely white, beads of sweat visible on his forehead as he realized the full scope of his miscalculation. Sly, please, I think we both got a little heated here. Why don't we just— No. Stallone cut him off with finality. We're not going to pretend this didn't happen. We're not going to smooth this over with some fake apology and a handshake. For the cameras, what happened here tonight was real, and it needed to happen. Someone needed to stand up and say that this isn't acceptable, that treating people with dignity isn't optional. It's basic human decency. The legendary actor began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. You know what the real tragedy is, Jimmy? You had an opportunity tonight to interview someone who's lived an extraordinary life, who's overcome incredible obstacles, who's built something meaningful that will outlast both of us. Instead, you chose to use that opportunity to make yourself feel bigger by making me feel smaller. That says everything anyone needs to know about your character. As Stallone handed his microphone to a stunned production assistant, Kimmel made One final, pathetic attempt to salvage the situation. Wait, the show isn't over. We still have the cooking segment. The musical guest. You can't just leave. Stallone paused at the edge of the stage, looking back one final time. Jimmy, the show was over the moment you decided to treat your guest with disrespect. Everything else is just noise. He turned to the audience, offering them a genuine smile. For the first time all evening. Thank you for your time tonight. I hope you'll remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they're sitting in that chair or sitting in your seats. With that, Sylvester Stallone walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage with the same dignity and strength that had defined his entire career. The studio remained in stunned silence as the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his usual quick wit completely abandoned, leaving him looking small and powerless in the wake of Stallone's departure. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of Kimmel's humiliation as he struggled to find words that could somehow salvage this disaster. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick commercial break, he stammered, his voice barely audible. When we come back, we'll have our musical guest. But everyone in that studio knew that no musical guest, no cooking segment, no amount of scripted entertainment could erase what had just happened. They had witnessed something rare in the manufactured world of late-night television, a moment of complete authenticity, where respect and dignity triumphed over cheap laughs and manufactured controversy. As the show cut to commercial and the studio lights dimmed, one thing was crystal clear. Jimmy Kimmel had just learned the hard way that some guests don't just have star power, they have the strength of character to use it when it matters most. And Sylvester Stallone had just reminded everyone exactly why legends are legendary.